Hello friends, welcome to Bhavyam classes, Delhi. So friends, as you know, your exams are ahead. So in this context, it becomes important for you to seek proper guidance and to follow a authentic material. So for that purpose, Bhavyam classes has come with a course that you can avail in Play Store. Just go to Play Store and download our app named as Bhavyam Classes. Delhi. In this app, you will find a lot of courses and even free test series. So now let us start our today's discussion. That is the end of bipolarity or the disintegration of the second word. So first we will look what we are going to study in this chapter. So first, obviously, the meaning of the second word. First we will look the meaning of the second word, meaning of the first word, and the meaning of the third word. Apart from that, we will also look what is the meaning of bipolarity. In the last class we have discussed. If you haven't watched the video, just go to the previous class and watch the video. There we discussed how bipolarity emerged, or we can say how the two superpowers USA and USSR emerged during the Cold War era. So for that purpose, go for the last video and understand why bipolarity emerged. Apart from that, we will look what were the reasons behind the disintegration of the USSR, or we can say the Soviet system, that were developed after the Russian Revolution 1917. Okay, so now we will also discuss the consequences of the disintegration. What were the consequences? क्या परिणाम थे, क्या हुआ था जब disintegrate हो गया था Soviet? So we will look that new countries emerged like Russia, that was part of USSR, but now it has become an independent nation. And we will also look what is the meaning of the Balkan states and what are the countries that are part of the Balkan state. Apart from that, we will also discuss Central Asian states, that means where is Central Asia and what were the countries that were part of Soviet Union or the Soviet system. So how they got independence, we will also discuss why did they secede from the USSR. We will also discuss this shock therapy, what were the consequences of the shock therapy, and how the democratic politics and capitalism were introduced in this post-communist regime. We also look what were the tensions and conflict. What is the meaning of the tension and conflict? The meaning is that here we will look how these nations were independent or were seeking for the independence from the Russia, and after getting the independence, what were the conflict there in post-Soviet regime. Last but not the least, we will look the India's relation with Russia and other post-communist countries. So let us start. So in the last class, if you remember, I left you with this map and said that we will discuss it in next class, that how this map that was in 1990 came to be known or came into existence in 2022, or we can say 23 even today. So we will look how these countries got independence from the Soviet system, or we can say how they separated from Soviet Union. So first we will look what is the meaning of the first word, second word, and third word. You must have heard somewhere in the movies or in web series that India is called the third word. In a derogatory manner, they are being used that India is a third word. So although these terms, second word, third word, first word, these are not relevant today, but they are important to understand political science or pol science and international relation. So these terms, first word, second word, and third word, they emerged during the Cold War. Now you look what is the meaning of the first word. The first word are the countries which are tagged as the capitalist. The capitalist countries are known as first word. Second word, or we can say even also, it is also known as the Eastern Alliance. So second word is known as the communist regime, or communist countries are part of the second word. They are tagged as the second word. Now third word, to non-aligned countries like India, Pakistan, Indonesia, they are known as the third word. So in today's context, they are not being used. Instead of that, developed, developing, and underdeveloped are commonly used. So, what is the meaning of the developed? Developed means that they are the capitalist countries, that they have achieved certain kind of, or we can say they have achieved an economic development. Who are developing? That they are in the process of being developed. And what the meaning of underdeveloped? That they are in the process of being developing countries. So that was the whole story about the first word, second word, and the third word. These concepts are important for your exam point of view. They could be asked that what is the meaning of the second word, what are the countries that were part of the second word during the Cold War era. So now we will look what is the meaning of bipolarity. So in the last class we saw that during the Cold War era, USA and USSR emerged as superpowers after the World War II. So this was the timeline if I have to draw here. So World War II, emergence of bipolarity, that was there till 1991. So 1945 to 1991, that was the period of bipolarity, and ultimately it led to the end of, and ultimately we see that the bipolarity ended, because every war has come to an end. So that bipolarity, that was the result of the Cold War era, that also came to an end. So that led to the emergence of, or we can say the happening of end of bipolarity. So just keep in mind, in the simple words, bipolarity means two poles. What are these two poles? One is led by USA, another is led by USSR. Just keep in mind this in simple terms. Now we will look what were the reasons behind the disintegration of USSR. So we know that behind every fall, or we can say behind the fall of any dynasty, any empire, any nation, there are a lot of regions. So we can divide these regions in political terms, political, social, economic, cultural. Even in some incidences you will find the religious factor are also important, or we can say contribute to the decline of the empire, but religion is not important here. Culture is important, culture, or we can say ethnicity is important in this context. So first we will understand what is the meaning of the Soviet system. What is Soviet system? How the Soviet system developed over the period of time. So if I have to draw Soviet system, the Soviet system was emerged after Russian Revolution 1917. It was established, or we can say formulated by Lenin. Lenin played an important role in establishing Soviet system. And also Soviet system was characterized by the ideas of dictatorship. The idea of dictatorship was there, idea of equality was there. That means they perceive to get, or we can say achieve, equality. Next, the Soviet system was also characterized by the closed economy, or we can say the Soviet system did not follow the ideas of free trade. They did not follow the ideas of capitalism like there was in USA. Apart from that, they were also So these 5 points: Russian Revolution, Lenin, dictatorship, equality, and close economy, they were all the characteristics of Soviet system. Apart from that, we can also say that Soviet system was, first we also need to look what is the meaning of the Soviet. So in the last class also I said that the meaning of Soviet is the conglomerate, or we can say the group of countries that were established after the Russian Revolution 1970s. So the Soviet system developed after Russian Revolution 1917 by Lenin. So this was all about the Soviet system. So internal weaknesses emerge after a certain point of time. Every system develops some kind of weaknesses, but we have to get rid of that weaknesses so that the empire don't collapse. So Soviet system also had the weaknesses. Like, what were the weaknesses? Due to dictatorship, there was the corruption. There was corruption. Corruption emerged after a certain period of time because of dictatorship. It also had the closed economy. So after a certain point of time, consumer shortages emerged. That means there were no products for the consumers. So they tried to expand the economy of the Soviet, but that could not happen because there were certain elements, or we can say the leaderships were not, lot of leaders were there. Gorbachev tried to improve the system, but all the leaders, all other Soviet leaders, or we can say all the communist leaders, did not accepted the idea. So that's why the reform was also slow. That's why Soviet Union disintegrated. Apart from that, the financial resources were used. A lot of finance was used in maintaining the nuclear weapon, military arsenals, because we saw that during the Cold War era there was an arm race between USA and USSR. So lot of finances, lot of money was used to buy the military arsenals. Apart from that, satellite states were maintained, or we can say maintained through these financial resources. So what are the satellite states? Satellite states means that are part of the alliance of USSR. Like Eastern European countries, they were part of the alliance of USSR. Apart from that, people were also aware about the economic advancement of the West. So they were keen to follow that step so that they can also go for the economic and technological advancement like the West. Stagnant in administrative and political sense means that there was the corruption, or we can say that the party members, the members of the communist regime, communist party, they were recruited in the administrative system. That led to the inefficiency in inefficient function of Soviet system. So as I already said that there was the idea of corruption. So the bureaucrats gained more privilege than the ordinary citizens. As I already said that the Gorbachev also took some measures to reform the system, because there were certain weaknesses in the system, but someone has to reform that system. So Gorbachev, although started the reform, but his reforms were very, very slow. So many people were not and also many people were not benefit from that reform, and they were disappointed and impatient with Gorbachev's method. Because Gorbachev, we will talk about what were the Gorbachev's method. Gorbachev is also important from your exam point of view. He took some two important measures, perestroika and glasnost. So we will talk about in the later slides. So many people would not benefit from his reforms, and they were disappointed and impatient with the Gorbachev's method. And there was an rapid rise of nationalism and desire for sovereignty among the Central Asian and Baltic nation. So now that emergence of nationalism in Baltic nation, that is also known as Balkanization. Balkanization. So Baltic nation that emerged after the collapse of Soviet Union, that is also known as the Balkanization. So I'm just look at this snippet, or it's from New York Times. What does the headlines of paper says when the Soviet Union collapsed? So it says Gorbachev, last Soviet leader, resigns. US recognizes republic's independence. So that means from here you can say that Gorbachev was the last ruler of, obviously he was the last ruler of the Soviet. So that was the all about why the Soviet Union declined. One of the most important factor was the Gorbachev's measure, and the second was the rise of nationalism and sovereignty. So next question you should ask, why the nationalism emerged in this Baltic nation and the Central Asian nation? So it was because of the ethnic violence, marginalization marginalization. So these two factors were majorly responsible for the emergence of nationalism in Baltic nation. So ethnically they were the diverse region, even Central Asia and Baltic nation, they were the diverse region. So due to the ethnic violence and marginalization, they they sought for the independence. So that's how the nationalism, idea of nationalism and sovereignty emerged. Also we can say that they were also influenced by the ideas of the Eastern European country, uh, if you go to the map and highlight, there was the nation Yugoslavia, etc. The movements were going on in that country, and they were the influenced by the Western European countries like Britain, France, Germany, so etc. So the influence of West can also be seen here, and the internal weaknesses of Soviet Union can also be seen here. So we saw that there were two factors. Majorly we can divide these factors in two categories: external and internal. So externally Soviet system was influenced by West, and internally there were some weaknesses in the system that led to the decline of Soviet Union. And also internally there were some weaknesses in the system. That's why Gorbachev introduced some of the measures like Perestroika and Glasnost that ultimately led to the decline of Soviet Union, or we can say the Soviet system or USSR, and emergence of 15 nations, 15 independent nations. So what were the consequences of the decline? So obviously there were two superpowers during Cold War era, but if one has declined, so that means the Cold War has ended. So the first consequence was the end of Cold War. Second was the end of arm race, and the possibility of peace was, but however it was not established because in the next chapter we will see how although the bipolarity has ended, but a new threat to the peace was emerged in the form of terrorism. We will see in the next class. So the whole debate, or we can say the whole conflict between the ideologies, or we can say the ideas between communism and capitalism, has also came to an end. Now US became the sole superpower, or we can say now unipolar world has emerged. Although all the countries had the chance to make the world multipolar, but it could not happen because of the US's economy, technology, etc. And US also used the hard power and all the we can say all the ideas of how to expand hegemony, like soft power and hard power, to sustain or to continue its rule as superpower. So unipolar emerged, multipolar could not be emerged. Emergence of many new countries, like we will see in the next slides what were the countries, they are important from exam point of view. how these countries emerged we will also talk about, but why they emerged and how when they emerge, that is also important for your exam point of view. And also where are they on the map, you have to also highlight on the map for your understanding, and to learn the memorize the name of these nations. So first we will look the Baltic nation. So what is the meaning of Baltic nation? As I have already earlier said, that we will look what is the meaning of Baltic, and how what are the countries that are part of Baltic nation. So Baltic Sea countries around the Baltic Sea are known as the Baltic nation. So what are the countries that are part of Baltic nation? So first Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, although Belarus sometimes also considered as the part of Baltic nation, since it has not access to the Baltic Sea, that's why it is not considered here. But these are also, Belarus was also part of USSR. So these three major countries were part of the Baltic nation, and when they emerged, or we can say when they got independence from Russia or USSR, not Russia, USSR, they were known as the process was known as the Balkanization. So let me write here the names of the important countries that were a part of the Baltic nation, Balkanization. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They were the major countries that were part of the Baltic nation. So now we will look what are the countries that were part of the Central Asian nation. This is important for your exam point of view and for the general knowledge as well. So where is Central Asia? So if you go to the map and look Asia, this is Asia, and in the center of Asia, that is obviously that's Central Asia. So what are the countries that are part of Central Asia? So Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. So these 5 countries are important, and they were part of the Central Asian Soviet system. That was all about the emergence of new nation. Totally 15 emerged, but these are the important. These 5 and last 3 plus Russia. These 9 nations, or we can say these 9-10 nations, are important for the exam point of view. They could be asked that who were part of which system, not system, who were part of which region. So Baltic region and Central Asian region. Now we will look one of the most important consequences before going to shock therapy. First we will look what was the first nation that emerged after the decline of Soviet Union. So first in March 1990 there was a movement in Lithuania to get independence from the USSR. So in March 1990 Lithuania got the independence from USSR. That had also the spread out effect. What is the meaning of spread out effect? So spread out effect means if something is happening in one place, there are possibility that they have the potential to influence the other part of the world. They are also known as the domino effect. So what is the meaning of domino effect? You must have seen the domino like this. If one block is pushed, then all the other blocks are shattered. So that is known as the domino effect. It is important in the international politics. Domino effect or the spread out effect is also, we will also study in security issue or in the when we study terrorism. So just try to remember that domino effect and spread out effect. So after Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Georgia, in these all these parts, the ideas of independence spread out, and that led to the formation of the 15 new nations after the decline of USSR. So in May 1990, Latvia and Estonia emerged. In April 1990, Georgia emerged. In August 1991, Ukraine, Moldova, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan emerged as a new independent nation. Apart from that, in September 1999, Tajikistan and Armenia also emerged, or we can say got independence from Soviet Union. In October 1919, Turkmenistan emerged as a new independent nation. In December 1999, Belarus, Russia, and Kazakhstan emerged as a new independent nation. So that's how the nations emerged after the decline of, or we can say the disintegration of USSR. So that was all about how the new nations emerged and what were the nations and what were the important nations after the decline of disintegration of USSR. So now we will look what is shock therapy. So we all know that the decline of USSR was a sudden process. That means it came suddenly, because suddenly all the nations were demanding independence from the USSR. So there was also need for the economic restructuring of those nations, and for that, to restructure their economy and to make them sustainable, or we can say to मतलब उनको अपने पैरों पे खड़ा करने के लिए. So the World Bank and IMF came with the idea known as the shock therapy. So it was an economic model for the transition of these newly independent nation from communism to capitalism. First, they were to make the transition from communism to capitalism. We all know that there was communist ideas in those nations, but now they have to follow the capitalism. That is the story of the shock therapy. That was only, we can say, it was the transition from communism to capitalism. It was also from a limited trade to free trade. The ideas of free trade are the part of capitalism. So they have to now follow free trade. There is also the idea of, in the Soviet system was also dominated by the common property. What is the meaning of common property? That means they don't have the private ownership. There will be land, and everybody is the owner of that land. There is no that someone will have this land, someone will have this, someone will have this, someone will have this. All the land is considered as one, and all the members of the society are the owner of that land. That is the idea of that was the idea that was there in communism. So common property could not be sustained. That has to be eradicated to pursue, or we can say to facilitate, the private ownership. So common property ownership was to be transmitted into or transitioned into private ownership. Apart from that, one of the most important thing, and you can say we'll also see when we study conflict, that although the dictatorship was to be transitioned into democracy, but since it was done in hurry, that's why many of the regions, like in Uzbekistan, in Turkmenistan, the dictatorship could not be eradicated for a long period of time. And also the shock therapy also led to the formation of constitution of these newly independent countries in hurry. So that was the story of shock therapy. Let me say it again: dictatorship to democracy, common property to private ownership, communism to capitalism, limited trade to free trade. That was the process, or we can say the step that would need to be followed if the countries are seeking the help from World Bank and IMF. Now, what did that shock therapy do? So, shock therapy did one of the most important thing, that it eradicate any of the alternative before the state. Like, how did they rule out any of the alternative? Now the states have, or the newly independent nations have, only two options. Although they have to follow capitalism or communism, they don't have the third option. It was eradicated by World Bank and IMF. They said that you have to follow the capitalism if you are seeking help from us. So, mixed economy, the idea of mixed economy, we all know that it is a part of, it was followed by Indian leaders. It was the part of Indian economy. So that also could not be followed in these newly emerged nations. So that was the shock therapy. Now we will look what were the consequences of shock therapy. That means what were the result of shock therapy, or how disastrous or how helpful was shock therapy for these nations. So first and the foremost, state control. Since I've already said that everything was controlled by the state, so state controlled industrial complex collapsed. That means if there was an industry that was controlled by state, now it could not be controlled, so that led to the collapse of that complex or industrial complex. So the consequences was also led to the one of the largest garage sale in history that happened in Russia. So in Russia, after the decline of USSR, Russia emerged in 1992 as an independent nation. That was also part of USSR. Acha, one more thing, that we'll come to that who got the veto power. Since USSR has the veto power, so why did Russia got the veto power? We will come to that. But before that, since Russia, major industries were there, major industries, infrastructure, state owned industries were there in Russia. So after decline, these industries, they were sold on a cheap prices. That's why they are we call it a garage sale in industry, because in garage we find the things on a cheaper rate. So what happened next? That value of ruble declined dramatically. Ruble was the currency of USSR or Russia. So because of the decline of ruble, what happened? The inflation was so high, because now you have to pay more for the same product, because of the value of ruble has declined. So inflation was so high that people lost all their saving. Now they have to, if they have to survive, they have to lose their savings. So they spend their savings to survive, for their survival. And one of the most important thing happened at that time, that since all the things were provided by the government, even the, like in India we have PDS, public distribution system, where the poor or poorer communities are given ration at the minimum cost and sometimes at free rate. So in the same way, in Russia, subsidies were provided by the communist state or the USSR, but since the decline has happened, so the government has to withdraw all the subsidies. In capitalism, in capitalist idea, the government cannot control anything, everything has to be left to the market. So that was also had to be left to the market. So subsidies were phased out, and that led to the emergence of poverty, or many people went to poverty. So that was the consequences of shock therapy. Also the mafia system emerged. What is the meaning of mafia system? in mafia system, what happened is, since you have left everything to the market, so some will person A will control some industry. Some industry will only be controlled by person B, and person A and person B will control some other industry, and it will have the monopoly, that you cannot cross him, you have to follow him, or his ideas are command, his words are command, you have to follow him. So that was the mafia system that emerged after the decline. Since there were havoc in the USSR, that was the reason behind the emergence of mafia system, and consolidation of the mafia system was followed by, or we can say the mafia system was consolidated by the ideas of free market. Since there is free market, so government can't do anything. If you have control at all of all the resources, government can't do anything. So that's how the mafia system emerged. And as I have already said, that the constitution of these newly emerged countries were drafted in hurry, that led to the problems in Central Asian countries. What were the problem? First problem was the control of government by certain people. Second was there were lacunas in constitution. So there were lacunas since they were formed in hurry. Like if you go and study about the Indian constitution, they were formed over the period of 3 years. They took almost 3 years to make their constitution. But since that's why we have the best constitution in the world. But they were constituted, or they were formulated in hurry. That's why there were many problems in the process of governance. Now we will look what were the tensions and the conflict in the region after the decline of Soviet Union. So there were two regions named as Chechnya and Dagestan. They had the violence, or we can say the violent successionist movement. They tried to be separate from USSR, but they followed the violence. So there were a lot of violence in that region. Even Tajikistan witnessed a civil war that went for a 10 year till 2001. So for the 10 year there was civil war. Civil war means that two or more group were fighting for the, or to capture the power, that who should rule or who could be the ruler. In Azerbaijan's province Nagorno-Karabakh, some local Armenians want to secede and join Armenia. So Nagorno-Karabakh was the part of Azerbaijan, but some locals, some ethnic, or we can say because of some population was Armenian in nature, that's why they wanted to secede from Azerbaijan. Although that could not be happened, even Azerbaijan's Nagorno-Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan, and here and there we see the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia on that region only. So in Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan and Georgia also saw the fight over the river water, since there are lots of river that go from Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan and Georgia with the other states. That's why it led to the fighting over the river water. So that was tension and conflict. Now we look what were the conflict and tensions in the Eastern Europe. So we know that the Czechoslovakia split into Czechs and Slovaks. Slovaks is an ethnicity, and Balkan Republic of Yugoslavia, Croatia. Yugoslavia got split into Croatia, Slovenia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Herzegovina. So that was the how the nations emerged in the Eastern Europe, but that doesn't mean that was the peaceful. That doesn't mean that was there was no conflict. There was conflict. There was conflict between the ethnic Serb and non-Serb Bosnians. So ethnic Serb opposed these Balkanization or the Balkan Republic of Yugoslavia. They opposed the disintegration or disformation of the Balkan Republic of Yugoslavia that led to the massacre of the non-Serb Bosnians, because Bosnians were demanded for the independent nation. That although it led to the formation of Bosnia, but there was the violent conflict between non-Serb Bosnians and the ethnic Serbs, and it was also interfered, or we can say there was also influence of NATO in this region. So the NATO intervention and the bombing of Yugoslavia led to the inter-ethnic civil war. The civil war was happening in Yugoslavia because of the interference of NATO. So there also we see the role of NATO. So NATO is everywhere. So NATO, even today, when you heard Ukraine Russia war, there also you find the interference of NATO, or we can say the influence of NATO. NATO is trying to help Ukraine, and it says that Ukraine. So we saw that how Chechnya, Dagestan, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, and Georgia, they all have, even today they have the conflict over many issues. They have the border dispute. So they have border dispute, like border dispute between Russia and Ukraine. They have the water dispute, and they have also dispute over who are part of which nation. That means the in Nagorno-Karabakh region, some local Armenian want to secede to Armenia. So even ethnicity is also part of the conflict. So we can divide the conflict in three major headings: border dispute, water dispute, and dispute over ethnicity. That means which population is part of which nation. So now we will look how the conflict emerged in Eastern Europe, and what is the role of NATO in the emergence of conflict in Eastern Europe. So in Eastern Europe, we know that Czechoslovakian country is now divided into, or splitted into, two independent nation, that is Czechs and Slovaks. And the Balkan Republic of Yugoslavia, that was the part of USSR, now has the Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. So they are now independent nation, but earlier they were part of USSR. So Republic of now I am repeating again, the Republic of Yugoslavia got split into Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. So although they got splitted, or they got independence, but that doesn't mean that was peaceful. That doesn't mean that came with a consensus. So there were tension and conflict over the formation of independent nation. So ethnic Serbs in this region, ethnic Serbs opposed this independence, or this movement of independence. So that led to the massacre of non-Serb Bosnian. So Bosnia that later became an independent nation, there we saw the non-Serb Bosnians were killed by the ethnic Serbs. So how we can see that ethnicity is one of the major issue in this region even today. Even today, we go to Azerbaijan and Armenia, we see that the major issue between these two countries is over the ethnicity, the ethnic population. Armenia is claiming that the Nagorno-Karabakh should be part of our nation, because they have the population of that region is ethnically belong to us. So the ethnicity, even ethnicity led to the violence in this region. So apart from the internal, now you will see how NATO played a role in the tension. So NATO is everywhere. Even today, you say if you go and follow the Ukraine Russia war, Russia war, there you see that NATO is also there. On the one hand, NATO is saying that we will help Ukraine. On the other hand, Russia is saying if NATO will help or NATO helps Ukraine, that's our moral responsibility to defend ourselves. So that's how NATO is involved here. NATO is saying we will help Ukraine, but Ukraine have to sign the pact with the NATO, or Ukraine have to be part of NATO. So that's how NATO is also involved there in Ukraine and Russia, although it was formed in 1949 during the Cold War era. But that doesn't go even today, although Cold War ended in 1991, we saw that. But NATO is there. NATO, the influence of NATO is there. NATO is influencing all the countries all over the world. Even it trying to influence the Middle East, even Middle Eastern countries, even the Asian countries, even the South American countries. So it tries to influence all over the world, try to proliferate its influence all over the world. That also led to the tension. So what did NATO do during that time? So NATO intervened by bombing Yugoslavia. It dropped bombs in Yugoslavia that led to the inter-ethnic civil war. So in Yugoslavia, there were lots of ethnic population was there, like Slovaks, Bosnian, Croatian. So Krotas, they are called the Krotas. So there were a lot of ethnic tribes, or we can say ethnic population was there. So NATO was also trying to get benefit for itself. So NATO intervened. It dropped some bombs that led to the inter-ethnic civil war in the Yugoslavian region. So that was the whole story about tension and conflict. In the next class, we will look what is the India's relationship between what is the India's relationship with Russia and other post-communist countries like Ukraine, Central Asian countries. We will look what was the relation between India's relation with Russia and other post-communist country. Apart from that, in the next class, we will also cover the important Soviet rulers. So important Soviet rulers are important for your exam point of view also, and it also helps you to understand the Soviet Union, even the era of Cold War and after the era of Cold War. You will understand that thoroughly if you understand what were the important Soviet rulers and under whose reign what major incidences happened. So that's all for today. In the next class, we will cover these two topics, and please go and download our app Bhavyam Classes Daily from Play Store and enroll to our courses. Thank you so much.